On the east side of the international date line, it is officially the day of Steve Irwin's death, effectively a sort of suicide in a way, because of the fact that he pretty much was a kamikaze when it came down to his willingness to die for the sake of his impassioned life with wildlife. It's rather interesting to know that my instance of finding out about Steve Irwin's existence and what he did was actually the same year that he died. In summer break of 2006, my family, for the first time, got more than just local access TV, enabling us to be able to have things like Animal Planet and things like that, which is, of course, what his show Crocodile Hunter was on. That was the year that everything came to an end for Steve Irwin. And it's funny because I very quickly understood and knew that this guy was going to die. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. It was an inevitability he was going to die to some wildlife that he effed with, because that's what he always did. One of the things that actually pushed me away from him and his show as a kid was the fact that he always contradicted his own advice. He always was basically the textbook example of a total hypocrite, because he'd always explain to everybody, because, you know, the main audience was going to be youth. So he'd always explain to everyone in his audience never to do anything you already knew he was going to do. Literally all the things he told you not to do, from disturbing the wildlife, approaching them, trying to interact with them, trying to touch them, trying to pick them up, trying to pet them, especially if they're anywhere near their home, or they're dealing with food, or it's breeding season, or they're giving you signals, or whatever else. And he literally didn't care. It's because he was genuinely careless. He was so impassioned about wildlife that he ironically got to a point where he just didn't care about, in a way, kind of violating their personal space and their safety and their warning signs they were giving him. So he would always get struck at by different animals and everything else that were just trying to defend themselves or were scared or whatever else, because he knew that's what they were doing. But it's just screwed up that you would be such a contradiction, that you'd be so enamored and passionate that instead you would actually choose to disturb these creatures in their natural environments and in their homes and everything else, especially when you're literally informing people that pretty much makes you a terrible person, and that if you genuinely cared, you would never do those things, when then he would immediately go and do them. My favorite commentary I've ever heard on Steve Irwin, especially once he had passed, was from Gabriel Iglesias, aka Fluffy, the comedian. So I'm going to show some clips from his Hot and Fluffy special because it's so funny, on point. It's just absolutely dead accurate about the reality of the situation.
It's such a loss to the nature community. You know, he taught us so much about nature.
And I got mad when I heard this lady on TV saying that he taught us a lot about nature. And it was like, no, he didn't really teach a lot about nature. If you want to learn about nature, you watch Discovery Channel or one of these, nature programs where they have a guy on safari and he's studying from afar. Crocodile Hunter, no, come on, every episode. Hey, what you doing? Look over there, right there. It's a tiger. That tiger weighs 800 pounds and it could kill a man in 10 seconds. I'm gonna touch it. If he really wanted people to think he was out there, man, America, we should have borrowed him and sent him to Iraq. With no gun, just a camera crew. Look over there. It's an Al-Qaeda member. An Iraqi soldier, one of the most dangerous creatures in all the planet. One push of a button and I'm gone. I'm gonna poke him with a stick. He's angry!
The main thing I agree with is the start point where he says that no, he wasn't actually a loss to the nature community. Because, every media station ever was saying, oh, he's such a loss to the nature. No, he was not. He absolutely was not. You gotta remember, you're an adult and you're mainly educating, via your show, Crocodile Hunter, children. And the literal way that most people, and especially children, learn is by example. That is, by action. So if you're going to go and tell them one thing, but then go do the other thing, you're technically psychologically implanting this idea and seed in their head that, well, if you can do that, then so can we. In other words, they're not going to follow the word advice that you give. the education you're giving verbally, they're going to follow the action that you took, which is in direct defiance of those statements, of that information, of that education. That's what they're going to do. That's how humans are built, and especially then. Especially considering children are also very much rebellious naturally, more than usually adults are. So as a result, you're really just, if you're a Steve Irwin, you're just creating more of the same type of people that are just going to go out there and disturb wildlife because, well, they're passionate. I know what it's like to be deeply passionate and want so badly to be able to have an opportunity to have an encounter with wildlife and be able to not only sit, chat, and have a conversation with them and shoot the shit, but be able, ask how the wife and kids are, but be able to maybe even physically interact with them, which would be fucking amazing. I would absolutely adore that. But I wouldn't actually be willing or allow myself to go cede to that part of my passion and violate these creatures' warning signs and these creatures telling me, hey, back off, and I'm not okay with this, and, this is my home, or that I have kids, or that, I'm gonna protect my food source, or whatever it is. I'm not gonna be stupid and contradictory enough to do that. I'm not a big enough hypocrite for that, because everybody is inevitably gonna have some hypocrisies here and there. I absolutely do. But I'm not that big of a hypocrite to where I'm gonna pull a Steve Irwin. So it was an inevitability that Steve was going to basically suicide. He was going to die. It was not an if, it was a when. When he was going to die to his passion of disturbing and disrupting wildlife. And the stupidest thing about it is that he's the greatest example of somebody who understands non-human language and communication, body language and everything else. He's perceptive of it. He picked up and learned the language and the communication of so many vast array of different species of wildlife and what each sound and body language and eye contact and everything else was indicating, to where he knew, oh, there's a nest nearby, or oh, this, that, the other thing, right? That there's food nearby, or that they're protecting their den, or that they, are tired, and so they're also cranky too and defensive over that, whatever it is, telling me to back off, or that I'm going to attack if you get closer. He understood and he recognized that off the bat immediately. He knew what signs they were giving him, but he just didn't care. That's the part that bugs me about it, because he was such an invaluable example of somebody proving that animals do talk to us. They do communicate, even the wildest of animals, and that you can avoid negative interactions with wildlife, even cougars. You can avoid getting stalked. You can avoid getting attacked or pissing off a fucking bear. You can do all these things to where you don't have to ever worry about wildlife endangering you, your family, your pets, or anything else, because you're reading their body language. You're reading and listening closely to the sounds they're making and the shift and difference in the dynamics of how they're acting. He was the perfect example of somebody who picked up on that, was super perceptive and understood it, but he would always actively defy it, which was so annoying. And that's exactly how he died. He knew it was stingray breeding season where he was at, which of course was in his home country of Australia. He knew that, but he intentionally went out and swam in their breeding zones anyway. He fully understood that stingrays are very, very defensively aggressive, especially during breeding season. And he still went out in the middle of the fucking brood, and he got stabbed right through his heart with a stingray stinger. How twistedly poetic is that of a death? Like, you literally knew how he was gonna die, and it was gonna be via these acts of defiance, and he literally did it in the most, like, straightforward, in your face, you're a fucking moron way. And so this is going to be really controversial, and people are going to hate me for this because it sounds really fucking twisted. But he deserved that death. He deserved to die that way. He deserved to die in that moment, because you don't fuck with other people just like you don't fuck with wildlife. Eventually it's the whole phrase of you do stupid shit, you win stupid prizes, aka actions have fucking consequences. And especially if you do stupid things, you're going to get stupid consequences. You're going to get really bad things happening, very negative things. And in this sense, that's kind of, whether you believe in karma or whatever else, that's just what he bestowed on himself. And he also knew that was inevitable himself. He knew he was going to croak that way. And he didn't care. That was something he had mentioned in the media and even in the show multitude of times throughout his life and his career. He did not care. He was going to go and disturb them anyway. He was going to be basically crusading or martyristic to die for his supposed passion of wildlife, to the extent that it was more a passion for violating their personal space and their safe places, which is just the saddest thing. And I think as a whole, the entire thing is even sadder that he was willing to do this and go that far when not only, again, does it set a really, really horrific example for the kids that followed him and that were such big fans of him and his show, and also the zoo, because him and his wife Terry, and as Bindi got older, she started being a part of it, and then obviously when he died, Robert was still so young that he wasn't really able to do anything at the zoo. But the Australian zoo, the literal Zoo of Australia, or whatever the full name is of it, they were the biggest benefactors of it. And in fact, his family still is. They still have a huge program there. They're so heavily entrenched in the National Zoo of Australia. But yeah, it's not just that he had the audience and that he left a terrible example. It's the fact that this guy was willing to literally martyristically kill himself, basically, like a kamikaze pilot of Japan during World War II. He was willing to do that and leave behind not only his wife, but his children. It just seems kind of fucked up that you would be willing to risk your kids losing their dad, which having both parents in your life is intensely important. Intensely important. As much as you can be there physically in person and also emotionally, mentally, and in all other ways for your kids as much as possible throughout their entire lives, especially growing up, right? That is one of the most intensively imperative fundamental things to life itself, into success, into health, into happiness, into self-confidence and everything else. You need your parents. In imagining that he probably wasn't there for them physically, let alone otherwise, it's kind of fucked up. And especially considering he literally did end up leaving behind his kids. It just feels really wrongful. Like, you would think you prioritize your family and especially your kids and being there for them over literally knowing you're basically being suicidal. And pretty much outright admitting that. And then literally saying you don't care. I mean, that just doesn't feel right to me. Now, that said, and all of this said, none of this is to slander him or to defamate him or to try to be an attack on his character. I genuinely believe that this dude had a beautiful, massive, wonderful heart. Like, I can't actually say, and I can't really genuinely pass any judgment about him, his character, person, literally anything, because obviously I'm on the outside looking in from halfway across the world, because I never met the guy, obviously. I how the hell am I supposed to know what he was like? But if I could get a read off of him and his energy, his body language and the way he lived his life, I genuinely believe he was just a gigantic child. And in fact, I think he even said that multiple times, that he was basically just a big kid his entire life, you know, and he was very, very excited and proud and happy to live his life that way, which I would agree with too. I love that. Being able to be just a giant child pretty much your entire life and be free-spirited like that, and how joyous you are and you live your life, is beautiful. And that's exactly how he led his life. At least that we saw publicly through the public lens, is that he always had this biggest twinkle in his eye and the most genuine, gigantic smiles and grins and laughs, and he was just so boisterous. I genuinely believe he had one of the biggest, most beautiful hearts, but he's just allowed himself to do some really stupid and contradictory things that aren't really acceptable. That's where my divergence from him comes from. So again, I don't really have any animosity towards him or hatred, even for certain aspects like that violation. I don't actually have any hatred for him for that. it's more disappointment, I think, than anything. So if I could say that his legacy leaves any kind of an example that you can follow and learn from, it is, don't be a hypocrite like he was. Don't do what he did and decide, I'm gonna violate morals and ethics and foundational principles and common sense and knowledge, and violate it, throw it out the window and say, well, fuck all that shit though, because I have a passion to technically disturb wildlife. Like, don't let him be the perfect pinnacle of why you don't do that. Let that be the lesson and the example, the role modeling that he gave you, whether it's to teach your kids or other kids if you're a teacher or whatever else, because I think that's the most important takeaway from his life and how he led it, is that. And thus, from this video too, I think that that's the most important thing to take away from it.
Watch out now, who's gonna get you? Gonna bite, gonna fight, gonna cut you in two. Make you sweat when it's wriggling through. With a snap and a crack at the runaway crew. Get tight for a close-up. Roll sound, camera, magic. Alright, people. Action!